We welcome you to the meeting of the Logan-Cache Airport Authority Board. This is something of a first. First time we've met in succeeding months and years. So, there's a lot happening at the airport, and glad that you have interest in those activities. We'll begin by entertaining a motion to approve the minutes as they have been provided.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second it.
Been moved and second, we approve the minutes from the May 5th meeting. All in favor, say aye. Aye. I believe you received a copy of the manager's report. We'll now go on to proposed hangar construction policy, and Taylor Sorensen is going to address his exercise with that. Do you want to come up? We're glad to have Taylor assigned to the airport as legal counsel. He's with the county attorney's office.
Yes, thank you. So I received a request to get this draft together with a couple of requirements. Some of the points from last meeting were a $500 fee and to just create a waiting list for these hangar sites. So in this waiting list, I developed some procedures that are comparable to other airports that I found around the country. So the process is very simple. The applicant creates their application and they file it with the airport administration. Currently, the draft says a $500 non-refundable administrative fee and deposit. That number is a little high compared to other airports that I saw, but that's what was discussed in our last meeting. That's open to your changes or comments.
Taylor, what are you seeing? What if that's high?
250, 300. Waiting list positions for new applicants are determined on a first come, first serve basis. And when a site becomes available, airport administration makes a reasonable effort to contact that person through telephone calls and certified mail. And the applicant is given 5 days to respond. If they comment that they're not interested anymore or they do not respond, that's marked as a decline. After that decline, airport administration follows the same process for the next applicant on the list. And to accept the offer, they need to reply in the affirmative within 5 days after notification. And at that point, I need some of your comments on what timeline you want for the construction of a hangar. So are you looking for 180 days, 1 year? The timelines can be as short or as long as you would like it. And then some other airports, they require having an aircraft registered to the applicant at the time that they apply. That's a requirement that we can impose or choose not to impose. There are also options for restricting experimental aircraft applicants, requiring that the FAA require it to be flyable. And then lastly, applicants can't, in this particular draft, applicants may not transfer, trade, or sell their position on the waiting list. I know that there's a secondary market for buying and selling places on waiting lists across the country. We can have that if we want or not. So it's very malleable according to what you feel your needs are. So I'm excited to hear your comments and how we can improve this first draft and customize it to your needs.
You've taken a deep look at this.
Basically, I think the first part of it is very good.
Okay.
I don't think we really want to get into the other more detailed things like airplanes and what you're going to do with it. at the ground space definition.
Okay. Yeah, some of that stuff can be left to,
I mean, basically, that's all covered in the lease that they will sign.
Sure.
When they're gonna actually occupy the hangar.
okay.
So I just think it's kind of a redo of the whole thing.
Sure. Yeah, it's always easier to take away than it is to add, so.
Well, I mean, I see your point of having it,
Mhm.
but I also don't want to cumber it and get other people frustrated with the lease, thinking they're going to have to do that on their regular lease. I mean, there's a whole myriad of hangars that are compliant and non-compliant as to what they've even got in the hangars. And I just don't think we want to open that can to everybody to have comment on a lease basis.
Great. Okay, so when you talk about those, when you talk about the first part versus the later part, so are you referring to like the experimental aircraft part? Okay. And then, okay. That can be changed for sure.
Just well, I'll save that a little bit. Other comments?
I concur with what Bill said. The other thing that came to my mind is we're talking here specifically about hangars, which implies there's already a structure on the lot.
Right.
And so,
Right, and I discussed that with our chairman here, that we're actually discussing hangar sites. So that's another change that I need to make.
I'm sorry, I'd like to clarify, when you talk about $500 non-refundable fee, administrative fee and deposit, it leads you to believe, oh, that deposit is gonna go against my lease or something. I just call it a fee.
Okay.
If that's the intent, which I would think that's what it is.
Some airports across the country, they do apply that towards a certain portion of it, up to their discretion, but we can make it just a pure fee.
I guess I would look to the board and say, what is the intent of that $500? Is that a deposit or is that a fee?
and that's what I think we have to determine.
And the other thing, Taylor, you've done a great job to put this together and just take the initial stab at it. I've made, if it's all right, Chairman, I've actually gone through and made some suggestions, and I'd like to get that language to you.
Great.
Poses a few questions along the way, and maybe in the interim between now and our next meeting, we could circulate that, have Janine circulate that, and you could see the changes that I'm proposing.
Because you guys are
The
in a unique position too, so.
one thing that I don't see covered, we sort of have different classes of hangar sites,
Okay,
at least by size.
sure.
And we probably don't want to pull the trigger on somebody that's waiting for 100 by 100 when a 50 by 50 comes available.
Sure.
So we probably want to differentiate in some way with regard to size.
So, just to,
Maybe we have multiple lists based on.
sure. Or maybe just to keep it simple and keep it one list, we could have the first person on the list be offered the first one that comes available, but if they decline that one based on size, they can remain on the list.
Yeah, that'd be a
But
good
if they
way to do it.
decline in this other way of not responding or saying they're no longer interested, then at that point they would be kicked off the list?
That'd be a good way
Would that
to
work?
address it.
Okay,
And in trying to identify the points that Bill was referring to, I think if we were to eliminate 4B and, which is having a registered aircraft in order to even apply,
right,
is probably not practicable.
Okay.
And experimental aircraft, just for everybody's edification, there are more new experimental aircraft registered every year than there are certified aircraft.
Okay.
And experimental is really big, or broad. EPS and USU's project, they've got aircraft that were certified that are now experimental, and all of that work has to be done in a hangar.
Sure.
And so it's probably problematic to have any reference to experimental aircraft.
Sure. We can make that adjustment for sure.
Any other comments or questions? Any questions from,
Pretty well covers it.
if you two will get, if you and
Great.
Brett will get together and put something together for us in the next couple of weeks, we'll circulate that.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Appreciate your help. Glad to have you helping us. Several of us here had the opportunity to attend the Utah Aeronautics Conference. For me, I was dumbfounded. It was expensive. It cast a wide net, and it came just 2 months after the Airport Operators Conference. But over 500 people from different disciplines attended that conference, and ask a few of you to indicate your reactions and feelings about what happened there. As I look around, we've got professional people that were there, engineering. We've had vendors. We've got presenters. We've got representatives in this meeting of every type of individual that attended. Why don't we start with you, Nate? You probably spent the most money to get there. So. Yeah.
Certainly. So thanks for inviting me. How much time would you like me to spend?
Well, you're wasting it now, but
All right. Keep it short. I understand.
quit when you're done.
Absolutely. So maybe just some insights to the conference for those who are not familiar with it. It was the first one that's ever been held. It was organized by, under UDOT, the Aeronautics Division, so Jared Esselman as the director. And its intent was really to bring industry, bring academia, bring government together and highlight everything that was going on in the aviation industry. As many may be aware or may not be aware, aviation is going through some radical changes, mostly for the positive. Well, we would say for the positive. And partly what's driving that is changes in propulsion technology. And with the changes in automotive technology around electrification, that's starting to be conceived in new aircraft concepts. And just to maybe be quickly from a technical standpoint, why it's changing is because the cost is being able to come down quite a bit in operating short-range missions or to go to hybrid architectures to save fuel. It's also opened the design space for many new airplane concepts. One of the interesting things about electric compared to a mechanical combustion engine is you can put propulsors almost anywhere you want on an airplane. And why that's meaningful is if you have a prop that can get you up at altitude and then have one that can push you, that can actually close on an electric airplane, where usually the more props you have on a combustion engine mechanical, that becomes expensive. So now what's happening is there's this incredible infusion of money. There's an incredible infusion of new projects that are out there. And what UDOT's intent is to prepare the state to adopt these technologies and to position Utah as a leader of adoption in these technologies. And so this conference was partially set aside to start to get a conversation going between all the stakeholders on how do we prepare. And that could be from how do our local airports prepare, how do we have flight training that prepares, how do we have AMP schools that prepare, And if we're also going to develop and certify a number of the propulsion systems or even the aircraft here in the state, what is the impact? And so that's an overview, I think, on what we aim to accomplish. And then insights into that, I generally felt like it was a very positive note to get the state together. One of the things our state does very well is we collaborate really well across different organizations, whether that's government, academia, or industry. And so it really started that dialogue. I think we also had a number of outside big companies show up. So Boeing and Wisk was there, if you're familiar with them. They're one of the leaders in these new electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. They've also been dubbed as the Jetsons or flying cars. That's the wrong way to call them, by the way. As well as companies such as Safran, who manufactures the A320 engine. So very, very positive initial response from also outside folks looking at Utah and looking at Utah as a case study for how the rest of the world might actually adopt some of these technologies. Was that helpful?
Great, thank you. One of the things they had as part of this session was a job fair, opportunities for students to interview with these leading companies, and also they had an opportunity for high school students who were considering a career in aviation to come in and meet with the institutions in the state that are providing training for mechanics, pilots, and managers. USU had a big presence there. Anyone here want to address USU's feelings about the meeting? By default.
So I'm Brandon Parrish, one of the chief pilots out at USU. I wasn't actually at the conference, but with Aaron and Steve Gassick, Aaron Dykes and Steve Gassick that were there, they came back with very positive comments about the conference, just expressing how those high school students are excited, wanting to get into this industry. And yeah, I don't know. Is that kind of what you're after?
Okay, thanks. Thanks for stepping up. In that regard, I have a grandson who wants to get into aviation, and all of the new pilot slots with USU for fall semester are filled, and they only had 5 slots for the summer session remaining at the time that he was exploring it. It's the need is there, the opportunities are there, but every one of the institutions are size limited. It's just tough to run more than 30 aircraft from a single airport and accomplish all that has to be done. From a consultant standpoint, what was your takeaway?
Judd Hill with Armstrong. Overall, the conference far exceeded expectations that I had for it. Not a problem, but a problem that arose for me is that every single time there was a talk, there was at least 2 or 3 different talks that I wanted to hear. So there were a wide breadth of information provided, half dozen talks going on every hour. While I was there, I saw groups of just a handful of guys that are hangar rats at another airport, and they just went there to learn about skills for flying, whether it was mountain or in different weather, but nothing related to airports other than being general aviation private pilots. And they got a lot out of the conference. Being able to see the mechanics get in there and not watch a PowerPoint, but have an engine sitting in front of them in the next conference room over during a talk, or sitting in a room surrounded by a dozen airport managers. So there really was a great breadth of information available to it. And it definitely helped bring the state together, and it'll be really exciting what happens next year.
Thank you. One highlight was as we were leaving the conference, there were 2 Delta flight attendants there passing out pretzels. So it was excellent. Baron, we got plans for 2023 with the aeronautical conference.
But yeah, Baron Weisman, so I apologize for my hoarseness. I just came back with a slight cough. I was in Ohio for the national flight competition, couldn't be there, but I was on the committee for the last years we planned this event, and the overwhelming feedback was positive. Two things, just understand, the costs were driven by the Department of Transportation, but they've committed next year to be $100 instead of the $325. I know we got discounts for all the groups for $125, and I hope that no one paid the $325. I do know some people did, but next year it's going to be $100, but we are going to be hosting it up here in Cache Valley. The dates are the 21, 22, and 23 June. So it's going to be a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday in June, which means it won't be in May and conflicting with all the schedules. We got more time to plan it. And we're really excited because it's going to be at the Tiger Student Center with access to the campus. So we'll be able to actually do drone flying on the quad. We'll have a larger event space in the Tiger Student Center than they had down in Provo, plus access to all the classrooms, access to our maintenance lab. We're partnering with Space Dynamics Laboratory, IGR. So we're going to have a lot of synergy with Utah State University. I did hear from the conference there were many presentations, and you're correct, Utah State had a big part of that because we're the largest aeronautical university in the state of Utah. So we're really excited about that. I'd like to propose that on Saturday we host an airport open house in conjunction with the conference. So that'll be an opportunity to bring in some historic airplanes, do some aerial demonstrations, again, showcase our airport to the community and to the state. And if we start advertising it now, I think we'll get a good return. We'll get a good number of people that come out. Some will stay for the airport open house, and a lot of people will come just for that. We've not had one since 2015. And so I think that it's been a long time, and with the pandemic and some of the FAA approvals, we were not able to hold one in the past. Yes, sir.
I was going to say, by then we'll have our electric experimental with full operation.
I'll write you down. So I'd like to propose to the board, I know in the past they've supported some of the security costs. Lee Ivy's not here today, but the orange fencing, the porta potties, and some of those expenses were covered by the Airport Authority Board to contribute towards the group. And if anybody would like to be part of the committee, we already reached out to a few people in the community, but we want to form a committee to be able to start meeting every month, to be able to find donors, find ground exhibits. I already got Barry Hancock, Red Thunder. His new partner in the duo is Carl Gashler, one of my fellow Air Force Academy graduates. His son just started our program. So they have both committed. Brad Worston has expressed interest in flying. So we've already got a third now aerial demonstration. And with this long lead time, I think we can be able to get some other good aerial demonstrations and some good way to showcase the airport. And with all the growth of the USU program, we now have a waiting list for helicopters this fall. We're up to 381 pilot students. But don't forget about price. Price could take 30 or 40 students. So if there's students that want to fly, they get the USU Eastern tuition for the first 60 credits. So it's a wonderful opportunity to start flying in Price. And hopefully by next summer, we'll announce additional programs for aviation management degree. But we're excited for this opportunity to showcase our airport and Utah State University and all the businesses associated with the airport, and to bring them up here to Cache Valley. X Factor will do a lot of the logistics, which makes it wonderful. And so they'll be a part of all the event planning, including the airport open house on Saturday. Any questions?
Baron, David was just telling me how excited he was to join your committee, so.
Very good. All right.
A couple of things that were particularly interesting to me. Utah, I think, is only one other location in the country that actually has an active air mobility delivery system operating presently. It's in Salt Lake County. They are delivering packages within a defined area, doing it by drone, by appointment. But they're moving slowly, but aerial delivery of drugs and other small consumables is happening in Utah right now.
Legal drugs.
Legal drugs, okay.
Legal drugs. Just want to clarify that. Her eyes got really big. My last bid is, as I'm on the committee for next year, if anybody is interested in doing a presentation, now is the time to let me or some of the committee members know, so we can put you on the schedule. So you were there for the type of presentations, you saw what's available. This is an opportunity for professional development for presentations, opportunity to showcase some skills you may have, or if you have ideas that you would like to see, please let me know. So that we can be able to start booking those out for next year. I know EPC, I'm sure, will have a wonderful presentation, as well as a flight demo on Saturday. So,
Talk with some of our customers too, there might be some more experimental EDLs or something we can get in there.
oh, absolutely. And so one of the things that we were talking about this year is the year of the drone for Utah State University. A new drone degree got approved, our Aggie Drone Academy. I got a grant with the FAA to go to USU Eastern, and I spent a week down there in the Navajo School District. But so next year, I think with Aggie Air and Aggie Drone Academy and EPC and electrical, I think between unmanned aerial systems and electrical systems, I think that's going to be a big push for next year's conference. And just the partnerships and the excitement we can do there. So let's be a showcase of innovation. We actually had some folks from other states that expressed interest in coming out too. So we're going to really push for Southern Idaho to Wyoming to come as well. So it's going to be a Utah Aeronautics Conference 2023. See you there.
Thank you. Jeannie was one of the presenters. She was going to try to be here, but she had surgery Thursday, and she said her recovery is not quite as quick as she had hoped. But she presented in a government session on the economic impact of airports to a community. And she'll be making that presentation at our next board meeting. Anyone who is interested in that ahead of her presentation, that study is available on the Utah Aeronautics website. So you can go in and review by airport, as well as a thumbnail sketch of the entire impact of aviation within the state.
So, Mr. Chairman, was there a request to host that on that Saturday? Is that something we need to look at, make sure there's no scheduling conflict? I'm not sure, is that what you're requesting?
Correct. Just to confirm that date. I do know it's Summerfest, but there's cash cruise, there's something every weekend in Cache Valley. It's great.
But nothing at the airport that you're
Nothing
aware
at
of?
the airport. It's not the
I just
second
make sure,
Saturday.
A, that it's available, and B, that we understand what the cost would be. But I'm excited about it. I think, why would we not take that opportunity with people here? It's great.
And in the past, we've discussed the actual physical or fiscal outlay when we get a little closer to the event. We know exactly how much they're going to need and whether we need to pay for it out of airport funds or help obtain sponsorships to pay for it. I know the construction companies in the past have been willing to provide porta potties and the orange fencing because they have it on hand. Mm-hmm. So, but when we get closer, we will address that exact cost. It's the electric power system show today. Dave Koch is going to talk to us about a grant request. He's been rooting around in the archives of the FAA and found a possible grant opportunity for the airport. And it's electrification.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Maybe let Nate introduce the company briefly for those who are not familiar with electric power systems. I have a couple slides here. Let me pull those up. Just go ahead. Okay. Nate will back me up here, correct any mistakes I make about the fiduciaries of the company, I guess. Many of you already know electric power systems. We've been in Cache Valley since 2016. Our history stems back to the mid-2000s. The technology as far as the battery control computers and the technology around creating aviation propulsion battery systems was developed at a couple of companies, International Rectifier and Infineon, And then Nate and his business partner spun that out in 2016. Had a couple of key projects, including the NASA X-57 experimental propulsion battery, which really helped the company develop mature the technology for electric aviation, and also kind of become the leader in the industry. Since then, the company has built 50 plus unique propulsion systems. A lot of these are experimental. 8 of those have flown on demonstrators. Pretty soon that'll be 14. And so really, as far as experience in creating electric battery systems, electric power systems has more experience than any other company in the world. As mentioned, we moved here in 2016. We built a new facility in 2020. A couple years ago, we moved into that, and we're just getting ready to break ground on some new manufacturing facilities. So what we've done is over the years to date, we've built the technology of how to do this 50 unique times. And now we've said, okay, we need to build something that people can just buy off the shelf and put into their electric aircraft. There are literally dozens, if not hundreds of companies building some kind of an electric aircraft right now, and they are all looking for a solution. So that's where we find ourselves today, in a highly accelerated growth industry. We're just over 100 employees. We're located right out next to the airport. We're leasing one of the hangars from Utah State, as we've talked about. We're building an experimental aircraft to demonstrate our propulsion systems on, and we're looking to expand up to 200,000 square feet in cell manufacturing and manufacturing of the battery systems. A few of the aircraft we've flown on that we've enabled electric flight for. The bottom middle is an X-Wing fighter that flew at Star Wars Land at Disneyland when they opened that up, so that kind of counts as an airplane, but more of a spaceship, I guess. The rest of them are, you see a lot of vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. There's a fixed wing, single engine, and then bottom right-hand corner you see the NASA distributed propulsion X-57. Really, there's 3 types of aircraft that business case closes on right now for electric. Obviously, you're limited quite a bit by duration of flight. That's still the limiting factor. But trainer aircraft, as we've talked about with Utah State, we're working on building electric DA-40 with Diamond Aircraft. The idea here is you have 60 to 90 minutes of flight time, and you can charge that airplane in 30 minutes. The other useful flight model that works right now is the vertical takeoff landing. This is, catching an air taxi from JFK to downtown Manhattan kind of application. Also 30-minute charge time, bigger battery packs, and then probably a little further out in the timeline, maybe in the next 4 or 5 years, are regional thin haul. So these are 60, 90-minute flight, much larger battery packs, and these are very useful for transporting both people, but also packages, FedEx, UPS type application. This is the first and leading application. Is our partnership with Diamond Aircraft. The idea here would be to create a trainer version of the DA-40, which would be all electric powered. As mentioned, the flight would be up to 90 minutes depending on your flight profile. We would be able to cycle that system 2,000 times, have a more reliable, redundant system, reduction in cost, reduced noise. And so that's really the application. The other aspect that we're working on here, besides just building the electric propulsion system, is building the infrastructure to charge this. So we have a project that we're building this charging truck, fuel truck in essence. Plus we're working with partners to develop ground infrastructure for charging the aircraft. So this industry is still relatively non-existent. It's growing very fast. If you look at some of the market reports and the studies that are being done, the addressable propulsion market by 2050 is planned to be $3 trillion. And so how we get there as a society, as an aviation community, depends a lot upon the infrastructure we put in place to facilitate that, just like electric vehicles. And the roadmap for this includes advances in energy density. Right now, if you look at this timeline, this is our battery power offering. We're at about 200 watt hours per kilogram. Very soon, we'll add roughly 50% to that, going to 300 watt hours per kilogram. So, you know, where we're able to do 60, 90 minutes of flight now, we can add 50% to that pretty soon. And then, you know, by the end of the decade, we plan to have quite a bit more capacity or energy density. And this is what we're planning on doing, what we'd like to do at the Logan-Cache Airport. So with Utah State, we're planning on having a portion of their electric aircraft trainer fleet converted to all-electric DA-40s. We'll need to have charging stations, which probably won't look exactly like this, and we probably back the plane up to them. This is an initial rendering, so all the pilots who grimaced a little bit when they saw the picture. But the idea here would be to have enough power. This is about a 150, 200 kilowatt charger that will charge that airplane in 30 minutes. So we need to have some transformer upgrades. We need some switching gear upgrades. We probably need to do some tarmac or some ramp improvements and laying some new wire. All things that Judd is probably I don't know how to do that. So that's the one thing. The other thing then is you know, getting started with a mobile microgrid, being able to go out and charge this. You know, if we want to maybe charge the airplane in Brigham City or other locations remote, this would be in the short term a great solution, having the remote charging capability. Longer term, what we'd like to do is let's see here. We'd like to have, you know, kind of a full infrastructure picture where we have maybe solar panels feeding some of the electrical grid. We'd like to add in some energy storage. So you see that cabinet, that gray cabinet there. We would take the batteries when they get to 80% capacity on the aircraft. We would put them into an energy storage bank, which would allow the operations to then charge that during nighttime hours when power is cheap, and then use that during the day when power is expensive, and so reduce costs of operations. But the real thing here, you know, this is great. There's a lot of benefits to electricity, but it comes down to economics. This is going to save the school and the students learning to fly a significant amount of money over the long term. And you know, initially we'll need to use some different aircraft for cross-country training and to finish out the private pilots. But longer term, we envision that all the training will be able to be done with electric aircraft. So in the effort to put this infrastructure in place and help Utah, and particularly Logan-Cache Airport, become one of the first electrified airports, we're looking for all options available. And we found this, as Mr. Chairman mentioned here, this Zero Emissions Vehicle and Infrastructure Pilot Program. This is not necessarily a new grant that the FAA has, but it may be a new application for this grant. It really focuses around two things for eligibility: a zero emissions vehicle side, specifically airport-owned on-road zero emissions vehicles you know, that don't produce exhaust emissions. I think when this was initially written, this was probably for tugs and different service equipment, but our mobile microgrid fits squarely within the parameters of what this outline is here. And then the second area is the zero emissions infrastructure, which includes refueling stations, rechargers, on-site storage tanks, other equipment. So we feel like we could include in there our DC fast charging infrastructure and then use this to kind of kickstart getting the airport, Utah State, in a position to be one of the first electric vehicle programs. Another thing that would be interesting and useful for us as a company is to put letters of intent. So we're working with Utah State right now to get a letter of intent together just to demonstrate to investors, to other parties that we're working together. This is a real thing. We'd love to put a letter of intent together with the airport as well, just to show we're collaborating together. That helps substantiate that we're all pulling in the same direction. So really kind of two asks is, first, is there interest and appetite for the Airport Authority Board to submit this application to the FAA? We could ghostwrite a lot of that. We could work with Armstrong to do that. But at the end of the day, it needs to be an application from the airport. The infrastructure would need to be airport infrastructure, which I think in the long term is probably beneficial because we envision in the next 5-10 years interest from a lot of these vertical takeoff and landing aircraft to find pilot sites. And if we already have the infrastructure in place, it's going to be a lot easier to bring them to the airport. We as a company have a vested interest, obviously. We have a lot of these customers. We'd love to be doing some of the experimental flight out of Logan-Cache Airport where it's in our backyard. So that's kind of what we're interested in doing. Love to hear your thoughts on that proposal.
Well, I think to not do anything would be a big mistake. We've got to, this is some promising upcoming technology and a company that's located in our community. So from my viewpoint, I think it's something we need to support.
Brett?
What do you know about electric vehicles, Mr. Chairman?
It's like waking up on your birthday every day.
I think it's coming that direction. I'm just so uneducated on that whole side of business. And it seems to me, remember the days when I was young, we had these big satellite dishes, right? And that's how you got your satellite television. And then it's since come down substantially. You know, I recognize the early adopters of certain things. There will be a lot of modifications and a lot of change. And I would be in favor of pursuing this, just understanding that if we can make sure we adapt it to the airport with Armstrong's help, to make sure as changes are made or needed with that, we could do that easily.
Bill?
I think we really need to realize that it's not going to happen overnight, but it's something that's coming, and we'd rather be in the leading part than the following part.
Question, Judd, this grant would not be part of our CIP funding process.
Correct. This is, the snapshots on the scene is from this FAA paperwork, and you have to be part of the AIP program, so part of the NIPIAS, but it is not replacing your AIP.
Okay. So it'd be supplemental funding where we're able to get any. And
At least off of first readings of it, yes. I haven't, we'll have to work with the FAA to do so, but it appears that it's also coming from a slightly different side of the FAA. So they
Okay.
very rarely talk about it.
you might share conversations we've had with regard forward looking at our master plan and how air mobility and electrification are already on the table for that.
Correct. Yeah, with the master plan, we definitely are going to take that next step. The point of that plan will be to lay the groundwork for the next 20 years. obviously, if we think back 20 years ago, not one of us had this, and now we can't live without it. So it's trying to figure out, this is one of those next big steps. I mean, I don't think that we'll ever see electric completely replace gas. There was a B-17 and a B-25 at our local airport this last week, and no one's gonna wanna stop seeing 8-year-old aircraft fly. So we're adding to the options available out there, not a replacement one for one. And then we've already been talking about some ideas of how to plan for those upcoming changes. Normally, or what's been more traditional is, hey, you lay a concrete encased ductwork and run your power through that under asphalt. Well, what if it's an open concrete with steel lids? Because the charging cables for today's technology may not be the same as what's out there in 10 years. Why rip up the entire apron and replace those chargers when you could plan and build in place something that can adapt quickly and cost effectively? So those are some of the things that we've already been talking about.
Yeah, and the Ogden Airport recently did that. They essentially just put 4-inch conduit underneath out to the ramp, and they have metal plates they can lift up and access that. And so they're trying to future-proof. And I think that's really what we want to do, is if we're going to do this, we get these monies from the FAA, we want to future-proof. We want to be able to do 2 megawatts on the ramp in the future, you know, in the next 5-10 years, instead of saying, okay, we can get by a little bit if we can convert to 208 3-phase. We should just put in the infrastructure to make sure we don't have to do this again in 5 years or 10 years down the road.
One of the driving forces in this development is lead, because lead is a major component of aviation fuel. Even though it is called low lead, it's just lower than it used to be. But lead is still a major component in avgas. And so part of the alternate fuels out there are biodiesel and other items, and electric propulsion. So we have a consensus that we would like to continue to work with you. If that's a letter of intent, if that makes it easier for you, then prepare something that we can consider at our next meeting.
Sure.
And one of the things that we probably need to strategize between the airport consultants and you is, how big a net do we want to throw? Do we want to include solar panels for all of the flight line hangars as part of the funding process? We'll need to get Logan City involved in terms of what it will take to provide the initial phase of that amount of power. And when we do prepare that grant, it's going to have to be dollar specific if this grant is like any other FAA project. And that's going to need input from a lot of different sources to identify what those costs are. Clearly, Armstrong's experience, the experience at Ogden, other airports would fit into that. What's it going to cost to bring?
Yeah, we met with Logan Power last week out at F11, they're hanging work, renting, just to get an idea of what would it take to transformer-wise and switching gear and so forth. I think we can base a proposal on what we know from that, along with maybe some numbers that Armstrong puts together, and use that as the basis for the submission of the grant. We're happy to kind of spearhead some of the legwork of that and draft up the initial draft of that. And I'll also get you some boilerplate letter of intent here in the next week or so that you'll have a chance to review, and then you can add some wording. I think it's the letter of intent can be two-way. There may be opportunities for you to put language in there that would help support grants and other infrastructure build-outs and stuff like that. Say, hey, we have the backing of industry, and from our side, it's helpful when we go to investors and looking for expansion to say, hey, we're backed by the airport and Utah State. So I'll take those two action items. We will work with Armstrong to put the numbers together, draft up the proposal, and then we'll also get you a boilerplate for a letter of intent.
That'll give Taylor a chance to do more research.
So, Mr. Chairman, may I just clarify, right now, if you own a Tesla, you're responsible for your own charging,
Yes.
right? You get the charger, you've got the service at the house. If I have a car or an airplane right now, I have an FBO or a gas station I go to. This, what you're proposing, this grant, if I understand right, actually the airport would own those chargers?
Correct. With the language in this grant, the vehicles or the ZEV pilot program funding is limited to vehicles that are owned or leased by the airport sponsor and used on airport for airport purposes with some very, very limited off-airport use. And then it also talks about associated funding. In this case, it would be providing fuel just in a slightly more efficient manner than an internal combustion group, not to say slightly, sorry. But it's a different type of fuel, so there could still be a cost associated. It should be enable revenue generation. You're not giving away power.
Okay, so then we would figure out what that pricing would be and work with the university. Because if it were me, in the traditional distribution right now of fuel and power, it's whoever needs that, for example, the university, they would be the ones to pay for those. This is a little bit different because of the grant, is what you're saying. Then we would be providing that and then charging for it. Gotcha.
And I think with the ownership being with the airport, there's an opportunity to potentially do an energy as a service, where the airport, under the grant, you would own the assets, or you could lease them from Electric Power Systems, or we could figure out the arrangement that makes sense. But then also, there could be energy as a service. If the utility is charging 13 cents per kilowatt hour, the operator pays 17 cents, and part of that goes to the maintenance of the hardware, so that it basically becomes transparent for you. We could even operate that, on a lease basis, or we could figure out a way where it's pretty easy for you guys, but it ends up being a revenue generator for the airport.
How much do we think we're going to have for a match supplying this grant from the airport side?
In there,
Mr. Chairman, I would also request that we look at the contract with our FBO and make sure there's not anything that would prevent us from being able to do this with that contract. Because we're kind of stepping in a little bit in that role.
Providing fuel.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
And an airport, so to address that, that definitely needs to be looked at, how that specific language is written. An airport sponsor can provide fuel, and in this case, it's providing a service not available. A lot of airports may only have Honey Low Lead, and someone comes in and says, hey, I want to offer jet. So it would be slightly different. Definitely need to figure out the language of that. In terms of the share, the federal share of the ZEV pilot program shall be the federal share specified in 47109, which is the normal AIP process. So in this case, it would be 90.63% federal. So in that case, it would be recommended to discuss this grant application with UDOT, as under normal AIP funding, UDOT splits the cost with the non-federal share. They split the cost with the airport sponsor. But that is planned through the AIP process. This being secondarily, it would have to be a secondary request. So as written now without UDOT, it would be almost a 10% share instead of the standard 5% that you can pay for other AIP projects.
You brought up the Tesla model. It was my first Tesla Tesla provided those charging stations and the power there all for free. That was built into the cost of my first car. They no longer offer that. I charge at home for basically 11 cents a kilowatt. When I'm on the road, they charge me 22 cents a kilowatt. And it's just, the delivery system is also a metering system. It keeps track of every time I charge on the road, and I'm billed accordingly. It's seamless when I travel. I just get a bill at the end of the month. This is what I use in a gig. It's very detailed, so that technology is readily available. And so the delivery here would be the same way that, as I see it, because of the funding, is that the airport would just be the source, or we could contract with the FBO if we needed to because of the contract, for them to provide the delivery. And so it could easily be handled a variety of ways. Please.
Just a couple of questions. I thought you mentioned Ogden City built some of their infrastructure into their ramp. Did they use Ogden City money, or did they get any FAA?
Yeah, they have an FAA, I think $10 million FAA funding to expand the airport. And I think with Hill Air Force Base there, they got some funding there too, except Hill wants to expand out and use some of the Ogden.
But they didn't use like this grant here? No. Okay. And then my second question, just kind of random, I guess. If going off like that Tesla model where you can actually charge in your garage at your house, right? Would a hangar owner potentially be able to purchase an electric airplane and put their own charging station in that hangar? Just random.
Yeah, that's
I know somebody who is planning on doing that.
So the short answer is yes. And so if you look at automotive right now, there's a couple ways. Like Tesla is unique because Tesla has the whole infrastructure, and they really just charge you for what's called fast charging. So if you want to recharge your vehicle quickly, you go to a supercharging station and turn it around with it. You pay a bit of a premium for that, or you can hook it up to a charger you own in your house that then recharges you very slowly. There's also, as a Tesla owner, there's third parties like ChargePoint, where ChargePoint will sell the charger to property owners, and then they'll actually operate, help maintain, and they'll drive demand to the charging station, and then they work out essentially arrangement with the operator to how they split the cost of that kilowatt hour to whoever owns the asset.
And Walmart's a big investor in those charge points.
So our model is that's, I think, what we would propose, very something similar to ChargePoint, and working with the airport authority, but we're flexible just to make sure that the airport authority gets this capability.
Something like this could be incorporated into the master plan, because when looking at the long-term planning, obviously, a hangar right now with manual doors, it's got probably a 20 amp breaker that's got a light switch and a couple outlets in the wall. So obviously, those things need to be incorporated into the landside developments as well, the hangar developments.
Other questions?
Would the grant include as charging stations for the FBO for transient airplanes? In the future, if you're doing the grant, include that as part of the,
say that again.
include charging stations at the FBO. They're trying to do an upgrade for their part. Would the grant include part of that, or?
I think we as industry envision that we could provide that source of funding and capital. That's why the LOI is important to us, because it shows our investors of people want to actually use what we're going to put a bunch of money into, and so we would envision investing into some of those assets, and then similar to a gas station, just charge for the kilowatts if you're charging in Brigham City or wherever you're flying.
Pricey, Councilman, pricey. That's a good transient point for people traveling the street.
Yeah, so I think there's a company we're interested in facilitating the adoption of electric aircraft as quickly as possible, obviously. So we have models where we would be willing to provide infrastructure or matching, or if we can't get all infrastructure, and then just do energy as a service to recoup our return on investment.
A big price, that's our satellite campus, and if we're gonna be flying airplanes, that's a great place for cross-country then. Price has got a great location, and whether, if we put some electric infrastructure there, that's a great location for our airplanes.
Yeah.
Now we get another satellite location where we can test flying the airplanes, and the flight time there is within that range.
Yeah.
So I don't know if the grant is for sole one airport or if it's multi.
The way I understand, and maybe, yeah, but I don't know that would preclude Price from submitting an application as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Other input or questions? We'll look for those action items.
Okay.
Report on training and, yeah, fire training and how you did on the 139 inspection. Thank you.
Thank you for asking there, Mr. Chair. Nate Thompson, Assistant Chief of Operations with Logan City. We had a really good week of training. As some of you know, we transitioned our team away from mixed personnel throughout the department to now our Station 120 that's located in North Logan is all certified. All members of that station are now certified. So that's 12 new firefighters that we have ARF capable, as well as a few additional mixed personnel throughout the department. See, it was a week-long training. 139 came and did that training for us. Yeah, it took a full week. It was about 2 weeks ago. The inspection went well. We had one little thing to finish up after the inspector left. We just had to test our foam, which, as you know, foam's kind of a bad deal right now. They don't like flowing foam, so we were able to find that. Probably looking forward, we ought to probably look into a grant. They do have a new piece of equipment that you can add to the ARF truck that allows you to test the foams without actually flowing foam. It gives you the data internally. So there are some federal grants available for that Oshkosh provides, different manufacturers of apparatus. So we'll be looking into that. The inspector was actually super helpful in sharing some of that information. I know Lee was still working on a couple things. I wish he was still, maybe here to run some things by. But in terms of the fire department's participation, and I don't know if people are familiar with that, but typically we have to be in the station and have to respond out of the station in 1 minute and then be midpoint down the runway and apply what they call agents. You have to have water on a fire, the midpoint down. So we did the exercise between B2 and B3 taxiway. Super busy airport, as you guys know now, but we worked that in between flights, and the crews performed very well. So it's good. I think the station-based response is great. It gives us capability with an engine to support the the ARF truck that has foam capability as well, and additional foam pumping ability. So it was actually a really good week. To my knowledge, the inspector, all she required was that ARF foam test from us, from the fire side of things, and we submitted that at the end of last week. So,
super.
Yeah. Questions on that change in how we're formatted? I know that's been a kind of a big deal on how our team is built, but.
Well, you went that way because of manpower planning and this.
Yes, sir.
Tell us what we used to do and what the problems.
No, great question. So it was the response was mixed through county fire departments in Logan City. And as you know, just through attrition and loss of a lot of volunteers within that system throughout the county, there's been a lot of growth throughout the fire service. And so the county has a new full-time agency, Logan City, and then Smithfield. And so with that, we kind of lost that continuity and the ability to do training together, truly. Well, 2 years ago now, when Logan acquired North Logan Fire Department and is now operating out of that station, that station is now staffed 24/7 with 4 personnel all the time. So now we have the capability with 4 personnel always within that response zone of the airport that are highly trained and there all the time. So we really feel like efficiency. It's taken some time to get that together. We still do have mixed personnel throughout Logan City that are certified. I'm still certified as an ARF response if needed. We've got a couple other pretty seasoned guys that did a recert as well. So we do have other capability. The tough thing is that the 139 requires annual training. So if you don't stay on top of that, and it's pretty rigorous. It's as Lee's probably pointed out, they go through those records pretty closely. So, you know, really just through the attrition and inability to train, really your only certified 139 firefighters that I'm aware of, unless they've done it on their own, are within Logan City Fire Department now.
Great. On another note, I heard that you had a couple of call-outs in the last 2 weeks.
We have, yeah, we have. So just be mindful, yeah. And one of them was very lucky. The latest one was, I believe, a van outside of one of the hangars that was fully involved, and luckily with fire when our crews got there. Luckily the wind was favorable. It was pretty lucky. But the captain that reported from the ARF station that reported there when they got there with that involvement, if it would have been impinging on the hangar, we probably would have had some additional damage to whatever was in that building. So, you know, maybe just be mindful of that. I'm not really sure. It's pretty random. I think there was another one that I don't have a ton of detail on, but I know that the van was pretty darn lucky. So yeah, and that was the most recent. And I believe the damage was just contained to the van. I haven't seen that particular report, but it may have scorched the exterior of the hangar a little bit, but luckily I don't think there was any damage to the inside of that.
Okay. Appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you, sir. Any questions?
Any other items of interest? We'll stand adjourned until further notice. The next regularly scheduled meeting would be July 7th. And it's likely that we will be meeting because we've got some action items from the EPS, as well as finalizing our policy with regard to hangar site waiting lists.